Data Driven School Counseling. So, the purpose of part one of this lecture is really to introduce you to the ASCA national model and to talk about how school counselors, notice I don't say guidance counselors. Guidance counselors don't exist anymore, really. That comes from an era long ago. Today's school counselors, the difference between a clinical mental health counselor and a school counselor in terms of training is just 4 courses or less in some programs. So that means that they really do get the background in terms of providing mental health counseling. So they do have these skills, and there's no reason to outsource when you have school counselors. So the old outdated guidance counselor is someone who typically was either a teacher or a coach, an athletic coach in a school, who then was promoted after so many years of teaching and coaching, and was promoted from day-to-day engagement with students to providing a lot of career guidance with students. So that training was very much vocational guidance. But today, that's not what the curriculum is. It really is a clinical training. So we try to make the distinction and call them professional school counselors who are clinicians and are able to engage in clinical work in the school setting. So I do want to talk about moving school counselors from entitlement to performance. It's important for you, even if your training, if your track is clinical mental health, you will engage with school counselors, you will have clients, and the kids are in school, and you will need to go into the school setting and know how to partner, how to collaborate with school counselors. You may even call them to gather more information about your client. So it's very likely that even though you're focusing on clinical mental health, that you will need to know a lot about what school counselors are doing. To start there, you need to be familiar with ASCA. ASCA is the American School Counselor Association, and they have created what's known as the national model for school counseling programs. And so they're very interested in data-driven activities. That is the hallmark of this national model, to be data-driven. So you'll notice in the PowerPoint that I provided for you to prepare for the classroom activity is that we're really talking about going from entitlement. So if you were to remember anything about data-driven school counseling, you need to maybe print out that particular slide that talks about going from entitlement to performance. So in entitlement, the school counseling program focuses on what are you doing, how many activities are you scheduling and engaged in. And it measures the amount of effort that a school counselor puts in. And it attends to what kinds of things is the school counselor doing. And also the idea that the school counselor is supporting the teachers and the principal, the school system itself. When we go to performance-driven school counseling, instead of focusing on the number of activities, this model focuses on outcomes and improved results. So it's not about what are you doing. The question is, what are students doing differently? Instead of measuring school counselor effort, it measures the impact related to whatever the goals were for what it is that you're trying to do. Instead of relating to what school counselors are doing in terms of their activity, it's attending to what were the goals for that particular year, or even medium-term goals, such as 3 to 5 years, something like that. What were the objectives, meaning measurable objectives, and what are the identified outcomes? Instead of maintaining schooling, school counselors should be advocates, and they should be more responsive to the needs of kids in the schools. So counselors, instead of intentioning on their best intentions, meaning I feel good, students must feel good, students smiling, therefore I did a good job. Instead, the idea is, what have you done actually? So, are you earning your keep around here. Are the students doing better? And what is the evidence that you have that they're doing better? Instead of school counselors talking about how hard they work, they need to talk about how effective they are. And they should understand that the future of school counseling really rests on how valuable the school community sees that they are. So it's really important that school counselors advocate for themselves by talking about what goals they set, what objectives they set, and what the outcomes are. I can tell you that I recently did a study in Southeast Florida, and I was so embarrassed. I was so ashamed because a major theme that the students talked about, the high school students that I interviewed talked about, was how useless the school counselor was. I was so embarrassed. And they said it over and over again. They said it in different communities, in different ways, and I had to believe it. So something has to be done in that area to make school counselors more relevant to the experiences of kids in schools. So data-driven programs do needs assessments. They survey the community, the stakeholders. It could be the teachers. It could be the kids, the parents. It could be people in the community to find out what is needed and how do community members articulate their needs. And then that will tell you what goals you need to set as a school counselor. And then need to develop interventions that match the goal of what the problem is and how you want to change that. So if you've got low attendance for, let's say, Latino males, then what interventions do you want to use to have Latino males more engaged in the schooling experience? And how will you measure that? So it's important to be able to determine what the measurement criteria will be. Now, the Ask a National model provides you with a worksheet, and we will be using that worksheet over the next couple of weeks and talking about SMART goals. So the idea is to be able to identify an issue, to determine what are some attainable outcomes, what is the timeline for engaging in this activity, how will you measure the effectiveness of the interventions, and then creating a report at the end to be able to talk about that. So it's important when you do a profile analysis that you think about what are the strengths, what are the concerns, are there any gaps in terms of how some students are performing versus other students, and attendance often is a criteria for engagement, because if you're not there, you can't learn. So you definitely need to take a look at attendance and so on. And I've done that a lot with my research studies that have been in schools and school settings. I often use as a demographic attendance. I want to know who's attending and who's not attending school. So again, the idea is that you try to understand what the need is. You create, you focus on that particular problem. So you identify that. Then you determine what the objectives are going to be, how you will measure those objectives, what resources you need, what's the timeline for it. Resources, human resources, material resources, financial resources. You need to think about that. And then always at the end to be able to go ahead, take a look at how you did, and then let people know, disseminate that, let people know. What's really important is that what you're doing is creating systemic change. There's been a lot of discussion about systemic change as it relates to marginalized students and, students of color, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color. And so it's important that we think about structural or systemic change. And so data-driven school counseling is about structural change. There are three types of data: process data in terms of what happened in terms of an intervention; perception, which is asking people about their beliefs, asking students about their beliefs; And the idea is that you're also looking at some kind of impact on student ability, like academic achievement. So you need to think about that. If you're thinking about engaging in some student or school-based research project for your research paper assignment where you create your research design, you could decide you want to do something that's data-driven school counseling. So you would want to think about what kind of data you want to use. And then I've provided with you a sample results report about a group of seniors and trying to help seniors with their preparation, their academic preparation, and then looking at what would that look like in terms of academic improvement. And in the sample, you see year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and taking a look at changes in academic achievement. Also, in the sample, you have the student survey, and you get to see the difference between year 1 and year 2. Again, if you get these kinds of results, you need to advertise it everywhere so that parents know, in a newsletter or something like that. Definitely need to make your boss know, the principal, to know how successful and how useful you are to the school community. You need to let kids know so that they feel better about who they are and what it is that's going on at their school. And so you need to think about both systemic as well as individual interventions that you want to do, and also making sure that you have support from the administration, from support staff, and so on. Once you do the report, you need to go back and review the success of the program and think about what do you do with this new data, and you create a new plan. So you never stop and say, okay, I did that, I'm great. No, after you've done those things successfully, then you take a look at other needs, or you engage in another needs assessment to determine what it is that you want to do. So you want to think about that. So it's really important in terms of best practices to understand trends, meaning you need to know the needs, and you need to collaborate, definitely, because you can't do it by yourself. And you also need to talk to your colleagues at other schools to see what are they doing, how successful are they, do they have some solutions that you don't have, and can you share some of your successes with others? So that's our entree to data-driven school counseling. I look forward to talking to you in part 2.